The homeless man I helped turned out to be my missing grandfather. A story of kindness, loss, and the miracle of coming home. The first time I saw him, he was digging through the dumpster behind my apartment building in Portland, Oregon. It was a Tuesday night in late October, the kind of night when the rain doesn't fall so much as it hangs in the air like a cold, wet curtain. I was carrying 2 bags of groceries up the back stairs, my phone pressed between my shoulder and ear, arguing with my mother about Thanksgiving plans, when the beam of the security light caught him. He wasn't like the other homeless people I'd seen around the Pearl District. He didn't have that wild, desperate look in his eyes. He didn't mutter to himself or flinch at shadows. He was methodical, almost surgical, the way he sorted through the trash. His hands were steady, his movements deliberate. He wore a torn navy pea coat that had probably been expensive once, and a Red Sox cap pulled low over eyes that seemed to hold the weight of every hard mile he'd ever walked. "Hey," I said, startling myself more than him. "You hungry?" He didn't look up. "Not looking for charity, miss. Didn't say you were. But I've got 2 rotisserie chickens in here, and I live alone. One's going to go bad before I eat it." That made him pause. He straightened up slowly, like his back hurt, and for just a second, the light caught his face. Something about the sharp cut of his jaw, the way his left eyebrow arched slightly higher than the right. It sent a strange shiver through me, like déjà vu wrapped in static. "Name's Jack," he said, accepting the chicken with hands that trembled just slightly. "Jack Miller." "Emma," I replied. "Emma Carter." He nodded, tucked the chicken into a canvas bag that had seen better days, and walked away into the rain without another word. I stood there on the back stairs, watching him disappear, feeling like I'd just missed something important, something I couldn't name. That was the hook. The moment that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and the grandfather I'd been told was dead. The problem, I didn't see Jack again for 3 weeks. I looked for him, I'll admit that. There was something about the way he'd held himself, the dignity in his refusal, that stuck with me. I'd grown up in a middle-class family in suburban Beaverton, the kind of family where charity was something you wrote checks for at Christmas and forgot about by New Year's. But Jack wasn't a charity case. He was a mystery. My mother had always been vague about her father. "He passed when you were a baby," she'd say, her voice going flat in that way it did when she was hiding something. "It was a car accident. Don't dwell on it, Emma. Some things are better left in the past." But I had dwelled on it. I'd found a single photograph in my grandmother's things after she died. A tall man with dark hair and sharp features, standing on a dock in Maine, holding a fishing rod and grinning at the camera. On the back, in my grandmother's neat handwriting, "Arthur, summer '84. Arthur, not Jack. I was 26, working as a social media manager for a nonprofit in downtown Portland, living in a studio apartment I could barely afford, and trying to build a life that felt like mine instead of the one my parents had sketched out for me. I volunteered at the Portland Rescue Mission on weekends, partly because I believed in the work, partly because I was lonely and needed to feel useful. And then, on a gray Saturday in mid-November, Jack walked through the doors of the shelter. He didn't recognize me at first. He was thinner than before, his cheeks hollowed out, his eyes rimmed with red. But he moved with the same deliberate care, the same quiet dignity. He signed in at the desk, accepted a tray of food, and sat in the corner by the window, eating slowly, watching the rain. "Jack Miller," I said, sliding onto the bench across from him. We met behind my building, the chicken. His eyes focused on me, and something shifted in his expression. Not recognition exactly. More like recognition of something he couldn't place. Emma, he said. The girl with too much food. That's me. He almost smiled. Almost. You work here? Volunteer. 3 Saturdays a month. I paused, studying him. Up close, the resemblance was stronger. The same high cheekbones. The same stubborn set to the jaw. Can I ask you something? You don't have to answer. People always say that when they're about to ask something personal. Where are you from, originally? He set down his fork. For a long moment, he stared out the window at the rain-slicked streets of Portland. Boston, he said finally. Born and raised. Left a long time ago, though. Sometimes I think I left myself there. And this... He gestured at himself. At the shelter, at the worn clothes and the hollow cheeks. This is just what's left. Boston, I repeated. My grandmother had been from Boston. My mother had been born there before the family moved to Oregon when she was 5. Why'd you leave? I asked. Jack's jaw tightened. Family trouble. The kind that doesn't get better with time. The kind that makes you realize you're better off alone than hurting the people you love. My heart was hammering now, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. What kind of trouble? He looked at me then, really looked at me, and his eyes, gray-green, flecked with gold, exactly like my mother's, widened slightly. You got a grandfather, Emma? I was told he died before I was born. And you believe everything you're told? The suspense. That conversation haunted me for days. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus at work. I found myself driving past the shelter at odd hours, looking for Jack, telling myself I was being ridiculous, that this was just a coincidence, that thousands of men had gray-green eyes and sharp jawlines and came from Boston. But I didn't believe it. Not really. I started digging. I called my mother, casual at first, asking about her childhood, about her father, about why we never talked about him. She got defensive, then angry, then hung up on me. I drove to Beaverton and confronted her in person, standing in the kitchen where I'd eaten 1,000 after-school snacks, watching her face crumble in a way I'd never seen before. His name was Arthur, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Arthur Miller. He was an alcoholic. He was violent when he drank. He hit my mother. He hit me once. And then one night when I was 16, he just disappeared. Walked out and never came back. Mom, your grandmother told everyone he died. It was easier than explaining that he'd abandoned us. Easier than admitting she'd married a man who couldn't love us more than he loved the bottle. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Why are you asking about this now, Emma? Why now, after all these years? I didn't tell her. I couldn't. Not until I was sure. I found Jack again at a soup kitchen under the Burnside Bridge. He was sitting on a concrete ledge, feeding scraps of bread to a pigeon, his Red Sox cap pulled low. I sat beside him and didn't say anything for a long time. My grandfather's name was Arthur Miller, I said finally. He was from Boston. He disappeared when my mother was 16. My grandmother told everyone he was dead. Jack went very still. The pigeon flapped away. The traffic rumbled overhead on the bridge, a constant, indifferent roar. Arthur Miller, he repeated, and his voice was different now, rougher, older. Haven't heard that name in a long time. Is it your name? He turned to look at me, and in the gray afternoon light, I saw tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. I changed it. After I left. Jack was my middle name, my mother's maiden name. I thought if I became someone else, I could leave the drinking behind, leave the anger behind. I thought if I disappeared, they'd be better off without me. Why didn't you ever come back? Because I was ashamed. His voice broke. Because I got sober in a VA hospital in Seattle, and by the time I was clean, your grandmother had remarried. Your mother was grown. They had a new life, a good life, and I was the monster they'd escaped. What was I supposed to do? Knock on the door and say, "Hey, it's me, the guy who used to break dishes and scream at you. I'm better now, I promise." You could have tried. I did try. Once. I came to Portland in '97. I stood outside your grandmother's house in Beaverton for 3 hours, watching her through the window with her new husband, her new life. And I realized that some damage can't be undone. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do for the people you hurt is to stay gone. I was crying now, tears I couldn't control, anger and grief and something else, something like hope, warring in my chest. You don't get to decide that. You don't get to decide what's best for us. My mother spent her whole life thinking her father didn't love her enough to stay. My grandmother died with a lie on her lips. And you've been 20 miles away, eating out of dumpsters, and you never once. I wrote letters, he said quietly. Dozens of them. I never sent them. I have them in a storage unit in Gresham. Every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone I missed. I wrote to your mother when she graduated college, when she married your father, when you were born. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn envelope, yellowed with age. I was going to give this to you the night we met, the night you gave me the chicken, but I lost my nerve. I took the envelope with hands that shook. Inside was a photograph, the same photograph I'd found in my grandmother's things, the man on the dock in Maine, but on the back, in a shaky, unfamiliar hand, Emma, my granddaughter. I hope you have your mother's strength and your grandmother's grace. I hope you never know the man I was. I hope you only ever know the man I'm trying to become. The twist. I didn't go home that night. I took Jack, Arthur, to my apartment, gave him a hot shower and clean clothes, and sat with him while he told me everything. The drinking that started in Vietnam and never really stopped. The night he hit my grandmother and saw the fear in my mother's eyes and knew, with a clarity that only comes in the worst moments, that he had to leave or he would destroy them completely. The years of sobriety, the struggle, the pride and shame that kept him from ever knocking on that door in Beaverton. And then he told me the thing that broke my heart and rebuilt it, all in the same breath. I've been watching you, Emma, not in a creepy way. I found out where you lived a year ago. I started coming to the Pearl District, hoping to catch a glimpse. I saw you laughing with your friends at that coffee shop on Northwest 23rd. I saw you crying in your car after a bad day at work. I saw you volunteer at the shelter, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, I could get close enough to tell you without telling you, to know you without you knowing who I was. That's why you were behind my building that night. I was looking for your recycling. Pathetic, right? I wanted to know what books you read, what food you liked. I wanted to feel connected to something good in the world, even if I didn't deserve to be. I reached across the table and took his hand. It was calloused and cold, but it was steady. You deserve more than you think, Arthur. Jack, he said, almost smiling. I've been Jack so long I don't know if I can be Arthur anymore. Then be Jack, I said. Be whoever you want. Just don't disappear again. The reunion. It took 3 weeks to convince my mother to meet him. 3 weeks of phone calls, of arguments, of her hanging up and me calling back. I didn't tell her who he was, not at first. I just told her I'd met someone she needed to know, someone from her past who had something important to say. We met at a park in Lake Oswego on a rare, clear day in December. Jack wore the pea coat I'd bought him at a thrift store, clean jeans, the Red Sox cap he'd refused to part with. My mother walked toward us across the grass, her face set in that stubborn expression I'd inherited, her arms crossed against the cold. And then she saw him, really saw him. She stopped walking. Her hand went to her mouth. For a long, terrible moment, I thought she would turn and run. "Dad!" The word came out strangled, broken, a sound I didn't know she was capable of making. Jack, Arthur, took a step forward, then stopped, like he was afraid to get too close. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, Caroline. I know I gave up that right a long time ago. But your daughter, she's the kindest person I've ever met. She found me in the dark and brought me back to the light. And I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. For leaving. For not being the father you needed. For not being the man I should have been." My mother didn't say anything. She just walked forward, slowly at first, then faster, and threw her arms around him. They stood there in the winter sunlight, two people who had lost decades to silence and shame, holding each other like they were drowning, and this was the only thing keeping them afloat. I stood back and watched, crying in that ugly, hiccuping way I hate, not caring who saw. The closing note. Jack, Arthur, Jack, moved into the spare room of my mother's house in Beaverton that spring. It wasn't easy. There were fights, misunderstandings, years of hurt that couldn't be healed overnight. But there were also Sunday dinners and fishing trips to the Columbia River, and the slow, patient work of building a family out of the wreckage of the past. He died 2 years later, peacefully, in his sleep, with a photograph of my mother and me on his nightstand and a letter he'd finally worked up the courage to send, to himself, to us, to the world, tucked in his hand. "I spent 40 years believing I was beyond redemption," he'd written. "I spent 40 years wrong. I think about him every time I see someone digging through a dumpster, every time I pass a person huddled in a doorway, every time I'm tempted to look away from suffering because it's easier than looking closer. I think about the miracles we miss because we're afraid to ask questions, afraid to offer a chicken, afraid to believe that the people we've lost might still be out there waiting to be found." This is an American story, I suppose. A story about second chances and third acts, about the families we build and rebuild, about the kindness that can bridge any gap if we're brave enough to offer it. It's a true story, or true enough. The names are changed, but the heart of it beats exactly as it happened. To everyone watching, good luck. Good luck in your own searches, your own reunions, your own acts of quiet courage. Keep your eyes open. Keep your heart soft. You never know who might be standing in the rain, waiting for someone to see them. Subscribe for more emotional American stories.